My brother tried to force me into power of attorney, claiming my soap hobby left me destitute. He didn't know I'd just signed a $3 million acquisition deal an hour earlier. So I let him dig his own grave before burying him with the truth. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, my vision blurring slightly at the edges. The notification was simple, a standard push alert from my banking app, but the numbers contained within it were life-changing. Deposit received, $3,250,000. I sat in the front seat of my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the engine idling with that familiar rhythmic rattle that I had meant to fix 6 months ago but never got around to. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, though it was a frigid November evening in Chicago, but from the sheer, crushing release of a decade's worth of tension. I had done it. Botanica, the little organic skincare line I had started in my kitchen with a terrifying amount of credit card debt and a blender I bought at a thrift store, had just been acquired by a major luxury retail conglomerate. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the fraying headrest. I needed to scream or cry or call someone. But who? My stomach churned, a violent reminder of the flu I had been fighting for the last 3 days. My body ached, my throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass, and I was running a fever that made the streetlights outside streak into long, watery ribbons of light. I shouldn't be driving. I should be in bed with tea and a celebration cupcake. But I couldn't be. I had been summoned. Family meeting, my mother, Linda, had said on the phone earlier that morning. Her voice had been clipped, possessing that academic rigidity she had honed over 40 years as a university dean. Attendance is mandatory, Rachel. Andrew and I have matters to discuss regarding the estate. Mark will be there. Do not be late. She hadn't asked how I was. She hadn't asked about the business. She had just issued a summons. I looked at the bank notification one last time, a small smile touching my chapped lips. I swiped the screen off, slipping the phone into my coat pocket. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that house as the disappointment. I was walking in as a millionaire. But as I killed the engine and looked up at the imposing brick colonial house where I had grown up, a knot of dread tightened in my chest. The lights were blazing in the dining room. I could see the silhouette of my father, Andrew, standing at the head of the table. Even in silhouette, his posture was judicial, imposing. I stepped out of the car, the icy wind biting through my thin wool coat. I felt dizzy, my knees weak. I grabbed my purse, clutching it to my side like a shield. I walked up the driveway, passing the gleaming silver Porsche Panamera parked prominently near the entrance. Mark. Of course, he was here early. The golden child, the venture capitalist, the man who spoke in buzzwords and looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain that made me want to shrink until I vanished. I reached the front door and hesitated. I had a secret in my pocket worth $3 million. I could turn around. I could go to a hotel, order room service, and sleep for a week. But habit is a powerful shackle. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The warmth of the house hit me, smelling of lemon polish and expensive potpourri. "She's here," I heard Brenda's voice trill from the dining room. Finally. I walked down the hallway, my boots heavy on the hardwood. When I entered the dining room, the silence that fell was immediate and suffocating. My parents, Linda and Andrew, sat at opposite ends of the mahogany table. My brother, Mark, sat on the right, typing furiously on his phone. His wife, Brenda, sat next to him, swirling a glass of red wine, her eyes scanning my outfit, faded jeans and a bulky sweater, with visible amusement. "You look terrible," Linda said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an observation delivered with clinical detachment. She adjusted her glasses, peering at me. "Have you been sleeping, or are you still staying up all night stirring pots in that workshop of yours?" "I have the flu, Mom," I rasped, my voice weaker than I intended. I pulled out a chair opposite Mark and sat down, my joints protesting. Good to see you too. We didn't call you here for pleasantries, Andrew said, his voice a deep baritone that used to silence courtrooms. He placed a thick manila folder on the table. We called you here because this situation has become untenable. I blinked, confused. What situation? Mark finally looked up from his phone. He offered me a tight, predatory smile. You, Rachel, you're the situation. The betrayal in his eyes was colder than the wind outside. I realized then that this wasn't a dinner. It wasn't a family catch-up. It was an ambush. And the irony of it, the massive, hulking irony of what I had in my pocket versus what they thought of me, almost made me laugh. But the look on my father's face froze the laughter in my throat. We're stepping in, Mark said, leaning forward, for your own good. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. Stepping in, I repeated, the words feeling thick in my feverish brain. I looked around the table. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Brenda sighed, a dramatic, airy sound. She took a sip of her wine, leaving a perfect crimson crescent on her lips. Oh, Rachel, don't play coy. We know things have been difficult with the business. She used air quotes for the word business, her manicured fingers curling in a way that made my life's work seem like a toddler's lemonade stand. Difficult? I asked, gripping the edge of the table. My business is fine. Actually, it's a money pit, Mark cut in, his voice smooth and authoritative. He possessed that specific kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no in your entire life. He smoothed his silk tie. We've been talking, Rachel. Mom, Dad, and I were worried about you. You're 52 years old. You're living in that drafty bungalow that you haven't renovated since the 90s. You drive a car that sounds like a lawnmower. And you're pouring every cent you have into soap. It's high-end organic skincare, I corrected automatically, a reflex honed by years of defending myself. It's a hobby, Andrew boomed from the head of the table. He tapped the manila folder with a heavy finger. And it is a hobby that is draining your potential. We know you took out a second mortgage last year. I stiffened. I paid that off in 6 months. Did you, Linda asked, eyebrows raised. Or did you just move debt around? That's what people in your position do, isn't it? Rob Peter to pay Paul. My head was pounding. The heat in the room felt stifling. I don't understand why this is a family discussion. My finances are my own. Not when you're going to end up on our doorstep when you inevitably crash and burn, Mark said. He stood up and walked over to the sideboard to pour himself a drink, dominating the room. Look, Ratch, I'm in finance. I see this all the time. Delusional founders holding onto a sinking ship because of passion. It's sad, really, but we aren't going to let you ruin yourself. He turned back to me, glass in hand. I've prepared a restructuring plan for you. I stared at him. A what? A restructuring plan, Mark said, as if explaining complex math to a child. We're going to liquidate the inventory. I have a contact who buys distressed assets, pennies on the dollar, but it's better than nothing. You'll sell the house, the market is decent right now, and move into a condo, something manageable. Mom and Dad have agreed to let you stay here for a few months during the transition, provided you give up the brewing. I am not selling my house, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and fever chills. And I am certainly not liquidating Botanica. You're not listening, Brenda chimed in, leaning forward. This isn't really a suggestion, sweetie. It's an intervention. You look like a ghost. You're working yourself to death for nothing. We're trying to save you. Save me? I looked at Linda. Mom, do you agree with this? Linda pursed her lips. Your brother is a financial expert, Rachel. He manages portfolios worth millions. If he says you're in trouble, you're in trouble. We just want you to have a dignified retirement. Eventually. Right now, you're an embarrassment. The word hung in the air. Embarrassment. It wasn't the first time she'd implied it, but hearing it said so plainly, in front of Brenda, felt like a slap. I see, I whispered. Mark slid the folder across the mahogany toward me. It's a limited power of attorney, just for financial matters. It gives me the authority to handle the liquidation and the real estate sale. It stops you from making any more emotional decisions. I looked down at the document. It was already drafted. My name was printed at the top, Rachel H. Miller. They had this ready. They had planned this. While I was negotiating with lawyers from a conglomerate in New York, fighting for every percentage point of royalties, my family was sitting here drafting a document to strip me of my autonomy. I looked at Mark. He looked so smug, so assured of his dominance. He thought he was the shark in the tank. He thought I was the minnow. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, feigning weakness. "To give you control." "It's for the best," Andrew said. "Mark knows how to handle money. You do not." I reached into my pocket and touched the cold glass of my phone. I thought about the $3 million sit. Ting in my account. I thought about the tiered payout structure that would bring in another $2 million over the next 3 years. I thought about the non-compete clause I had signed that effectively retired me today. They saw a failure. I saw a scoreboard where I was winning by a landslide. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. You don't build a business from nothing without learning how to spot a bad deal. "I need a moment," I said, coughing into my elbow. "I need to use the restroom. Then I'll look at the papers." "Take your time," Mark said, sipping his scotch. "We aren't going anywhere." He had no idea. I locked the bathroom door behind me and leaned against the cold wood, breathing heavily. The face in the mirror was pale, with dark circles under the eyes that looked like bruises. I did look terrible. But I smiled, a fierce wolfish smile. To understand why this moment was so pivotal, you have to understand the last 10 years. When I started Botanica, I was 42, divorced, and starting over. I had always loved chemistry, loved the way plants interacted with oils. I started making soaps to help with my own eczema. Then I made them for friends. Then I started selling them at farmers' markets. My family was mortified. "You have a master's degree in library science," my father had raged when I quit my job at the city archive. "And you're going to become a peddler." "It's artisanal," I had argued. "It's a flea market stall," Mark had corrected. For a decade, I missed every major holiday because the holiday season is retail hell. I missed Mark's promotion parties. I missed Brenda's gallery openings. I was in my kitchen, then my garage, then a small rented warehouse, stirring vats of shea butter and essential oils until my arms felt like lead. I reinvested everything. I wore clothes from Goodwill so I could afford better packaging. I drove my rattling Honda so I could hire a part-time assistant. I lived lean so the business could grow fat. And all the while, Mark was the star. Mark, the venture capitalist. Mark, who joined a firm right out of Wharton. Mark, who leased a new luxury car every 2 years and bought a sprawling house in the suburbs that looked like a hotel lobby, impersonal and cold. Mark was the yardstick I was beaten with. "Why can't you be more stable like Mark? Mark just bought a boat. Mark is taking us to Italy." But I had noticed things over the years. Cracks in the golden facade. 2 Christmases ago, Mark's card was declined at a restaurant. He laughed it off, blaming a fraud alert, but I saw the sweat bead on his upper lip. Last year, Brenda complained that they had to fire their housekeeper because good help is so hard to find. But then I saw her selling designer handbags on a resale app a week later. And Mark was a talker. He used words like leverage and synergy and disruptive, but he never actually made anything. He moved money around. He bet on other people's work. Now, staring at myself in the mirror, the pieces clicked into place. Why the sudden intervention? Why the urgency to sell my house and liquidate my inventory? Distressed assets. Mark didn't want to save me. Mark needed money. If he got power of attorney, he could sell my house, which was paid off, and pocket the proceeds under the guise of management fees or investments. He could sell my inventory for quick cash. He looked at me and saw a piggy bank he could smash open to cover his own mistakes. I washed my face with cold water, scrubbing away the fever sweat. I wasn't the little sister anymore. I wasn't the failure. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar brand, and I was about to walk into a negotiation with the most dishonest counterparty I had ever faced. I unlocked the door. When I returned to the dining room, nothing had changed, except Brenda had refilled her wine glass. "Feeling better?" Mark asked, tapping the pen against the table. "A little," I said. I didn't sit down. I stood at the end of the table, gripping the back of the chair. "So," Mark said, pushing the paper forward, "let's get this signed so we can start fixing your mess." "I have a few questions first," I said, my voice steady despite the scratchiness. "Rachel, don't make this difficult," Linda sighed. "Mark is doing you a favor. He's waiving his usual consulting fees. Mostly." "Mostly?" I asked, looking at Mark. Mark shrugged, a gesture of false modesty. "I have to charge a small percentage for the time, Ratch. My hourly rate is usually $800, but for family, we'll work something out. The point is to get you liquid." "Liquid," I repeated. "Right." I looked at Brenda. She was looking at her nails, bored. She wore a diamond bracelet that I recognized. It was new, probably put on a credit card that was maxed out. "And you, Dad," I looked at Andrew. "You think I'm incapable." "I think you are a dreamer," Andrew said sternly. "And dreamers end up broke. Mark is." "A realist, he is a man of substance." "Substance," I echoed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I placed it on the table, face down. "Mark," I said softly, "before I sign anything, tell me about the Alpha Fund." Mark froze, the pen stopped tapping. His eyes, usually so arrogant, flickered with genuine fear. "What?" "The Alpha Fund," I said. "The one you managed. The one that tanked 3 months ago because of over-leveraged tech bets. I read the Financial Times, Mark. I may make soap, but I can read." The room went deadly silent. Linda looked between us, confused. "What is she talking about, Mark?" "She's delirious," Mark said quickly, his face flushing red. "It's the fever. Just sign the papers, Rachel." "I'm not signing anything," I said. "But I think we should talk about why you really need access to my assets. Is it to cover a margin call, Mark?" Mark stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You ungrateful little." "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a command. Low, flat, and absolute. It was the voice of a woman who had just stared down a room of corporate lawyers and walked away with everything she wanted. Mark blinked. He didn't sit, but he stopped moving. "You think I'm a failure," I said, looking at my parents. "You think I'm a charity case." I picked up the manila folder, the restructuring plan, and ripped it in half. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "But you've forgotten one thing," I said, tossing the torn pieces onto the table. "What?" Brenda whispered, her eyes wide. "I don't need your money," I said, "but it looks like you desperately need mine." The silence following my declaration was absolute, but I didn't stay to enjoy it. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Rachel, get back here," Mark's voice cracked, losing its polished baritone veneer. It sounded thin, desperate. I didn't stop. I marched down the hallway, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the biting Chicago wind. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock the Civic. As I slid into the driver's seat, I saw the front door of the house fly open. Mark stood there, silhouetted by the warm light of the foyer, looking for all the world like a man watching his life raft drift away. I locked the doors and started the engine. As I pulled away, I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur of feverish heat and icy chills. My body was staging a revolt, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The adrenaline of the confrontation had burned through the brain fog. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my small, 1920s bungalow, I didn't just see a drafty old house. I saw my sanctuary. I saw the place where I had stayed up until 4:00 a.m. perfecting the emulsification process for the Midnight Rose cream, the very product that had just caught the eye of a conglomerate worth billions. I stumbled inside, locking the deadbolt behind me. I tossed my coat on the couch and went straight to my home office, a converted sunroom cluttered with invoices, shipping labels, and product samples. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I knew Mark was in trouble. The financial rumors had been swirling in the peripheral circles of Chicago's business world, whispers I picked up from suppliers and former colleagues. But I needed concrete proof. If I was going to protect myself, and more importantly, protect my parents from their own blind loyalty, I needed ammunition. I dialed a number I had saved only a week ago. "David, it's Rachel," I rasped into the phone. "Rachel, it's 9 o'clock on a Friday," David replied, his voice calm and professional. David was the lead counsel for the acquisition deal. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, but he had a soft spot for my underdog story. "Is everything okay with the wire transfer?" The bank confirmed receipt. "The money is fine," I said, coughing. "I need a different kind of help. I need a forensic check on an individual, someone in finance." "Who?" "My brother, Mark Miller. He runs or ran the Alpha Strategy Fund." There was a pause on the line. "Miller, Alpha Strategy, I've heard that name. There was a rumble in the venture capital sector a few months back. A leveraged buyout that went south, something about tech futures." "I need the details, David. Public records, court filings, lien searches, everything legally accessible." He just tried to get me to sign a power of attorney to manage my assets because he claims I'm destitute. I think he's trying to use my liquidity to cover his positions. He tried to take POA over a woman who just netted $3 million cash. David let out a low whistle. "That's bold, or desperate. I'll have my paralegal run a background scrub tonight, if there are liens or lawsuits will find them. Get some rest, Rachel. You sound like you're dying." "I feel like it," I admitted, "but I'm not the one in trouble." I hung up, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the next 4 hours doing my own digging. I wasn't a financier, but I was a researcher by trade. I knew how to find things. I dug into the county clerk's records online. I searched property tax databases. What I found made my blood run cold. Mark's sprawling suburban mansion, the one with the heated driveway and the home theater, had a notice of default filed 3 weeks ago. He was 4 months behind on his mortgage. But that wasn't the worst part. I found a UCC filing, a lien against personal assets, dated 2 months prior. The debtor was Mark. The creditor was a private lending firm, the kind that charges predatory interest rates to people who can't get money from banks. He wasn't just broke. He was underwater, breathing through a straw, and the tide was rising. And then I saw the date on the restructuring plan he had tried to hand me. He had drafted it 3 days ago. Exactly 1 day after the local business journal had run a small, speculative piece about Botanica potentially seeking buyers. He had seen the article, he knew I might have money coming, and he had pounced. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the laptop stinging my tired eyes. This wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was predation. My brother, the golden child, was ready to cannibalize his own sister to keep up appearances. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my independence. I was fighting a man with nothing left to lose. The next morning, the flu had settled deep into my chest, a heavy weight that made every breath a chore. But I didn't have time to be sick. I was in my workshop, a converted detached garage behind the house, labeling the final batch of independent inventory. The space smelled of lavender, sandalwood, and cold process soap curring on the racks. It was clean, organized, and professional, a far cry from the hobby room my mother imagined. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, heavy tires. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped out of the workshop. Mark's silver Porsche was blocking my driveway. He stepped out, wearing a cashmere sweater and designer jeans, looking like he was ready for a photo shoot. But up close, the cracks were visible. His eyes were bloodshot. There was a tremor in his hand as he slammed the car door. "We need to talk," he said, skipping the greeting. "I'm working, Mark," I said, leaning against the doorframe of the workshop. "Unlike some people, I actually produce things." He flinched, the barb landed. He stormed up the driveway, ignoring the mud splashing onto his Italian loafers. "You humiliated me last night. Mom is a wreck. She thinks you're having a mental breakdown." "Mom thinks what you tell her to think," I said calmly. "You need to sign those papers, Rachel," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. He stopped 3 feet from me, towering over my smaller frame. "I looked at your accounts a year ago. You were scraping by. You don't know how to handle the market shift that's coming. I can save what little equity you have in this. Dump." He gestured vaguely at my house. "Save it?" I asked. "Like you saved your house in Highland Park? I saw the default notice, Mark." Mark froze. His face went pale, then a blotchy, angry red. "You don't know what you're talking about. That's a clerical error. My lawyers are handling it." "And the private loan from Apex Capital?" I pressed, stepping forward. "The high-interest bridge loan secured against your personal assets. Is that a clerical error too?" He took a step back, genuinely rattled. "You've been spying on me." "I've been doing due diligence," I said. "Something you should have done before you tried to hustle me. I know you're broke, Mark. I know the Alpha Fund collapsed. I know investors are threatening to sue you for negligence." "It was a market correction," he shouted, his composure shattering. "It wasn't my fault. The tech sector tanked." "And you were over-leveraged," I said softly. "You gambled and you lost. And now you want my house, my inventory. What were you going to do? Sell it all for 50 grand to pay off 1 month of interest on your debts?" "It's not just about the money," he spat, pacing in a tight circle on the gravel. "It's about the legacy, Dad's reputation. If I go under, if I declare bankruptcy, the family name is mud in this town. Andrew Miller's son, a failure, it would kill him. It would literally kill Dad." He turned to me, his eyes wide and frantic. "I'm doing this for them. I need liquidity to bridge the gap until my next deal closes. I just need a bridge, Rachel. And you're sitting here playing chemist while the family legacy burns." "So you were going to steal from me to save your reputation," I summarized. "Borrow," he corrected, screaming now. "I was going. To borrow it, I would have paid you back tenfold once the market turned." "You and I both know that's a lie," I said, feeling a strange calmness amidst his storm. "You would have drained me dry and then blamed me for not having enough to save you." Mark stared at me with pure hatred. "You selfish bitch. You have nothing. You are a spinster making soap in a garage. You think you're smart because you read a few public records? You have no idea how the world works." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to sign that power of attorney. If you don't, I will have Mom and Dad declare you incompetent. I'll tell them about your episodes. I'll tell them you're hoarding trash. I'll get a doctor to sign off that you're unable to care for yourself. I will bury you in legal fees until you beg me to take control." It was a clumsy threat, born of panic, but it chilled me. He was desperate enough to weaponize the legal system, our father's world, against me. "Get off my property," I said. "Think about it," Mark sneered. "You can be the supportive sister, or you can be the institutionalized spinster. Your choice." He turned and walked back to his car. As he drove away, spraying gravel, I pulled my phone from my apron pocket. It had been recording the entire time. But as I replayed his threat in my mind, a terrifying thought struck me. He mentioned saving the family name. He mentioned doing it for Mom and Dad. If he couldn't get the money from me, where would he go next? I looked at the time. It was 11:00 a.m. My parents would be at their country club lunch. Mark wasn't going to his office. He was going to them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Mark was cornered. I had shut the door on his access to my assets, so he would pivot to the only other source of liquidity available to him: our parents. Andrew and Linda were comfortable, but they weren't liquid. Their wealth was tied up in their house, the house they had lived in for 40 years, and their retirement accounts. If Mark convinced them to leverage the house, or worse, cash out their annuities to help him invest in a sure thing to save the family name, they would be destitute within a year. I ran back inside, coughing violently, and grabbed my laptop. My phone buzzed. It was David, my lawyer. "I have the report," David said, his voice grim. "Rachel, it's worse than we thought." "Tell me," I said, putting the phone on speaker as I frantically pulled up my email. "The lawsuit isn't just threatened. It was filed 2 days ago. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. His partners are alleging he moved client money into his personal accounts to cover margin calls. He's looking at prison time, Rachel, not just bankruptcy. Prison." I stared at the wall. "He needs cash to settle," I whispered. "He needs to pay them back before the criminal charges stick." "Exactly," David said. "He needs a massive injection of capital immediately to make the plaintiffs go away. If he doesn't get it within days, he's done." "He's going after my parents," I said. "He's going to try to get them to sign over their home equity." "You need to stop him," David warned. "If they sign voluntarily, even under manipulation, it's very hard to undo, especially if he's their son." "I know," I said. "I need proof, hard proof. Something my father, the lawyer, can't ignore. The lawsuit is good, but Mark will spin it as a misunderstanding. I need proof that he's already stealing from family." "Check the trust," David suggested. "Did your grandmother leave a trust?" "Yes," I said, my eyes widening. "The education trust. For the grandchildren, Mark is the trustee. If he's desperate, that's the first piggy bank he'd break. Do you have access?" "I'm a beneficiary," I said. "I have read-only access." I hung up and logged into the investment portal for the family trust. My grandmother had left a modest but significant sum for Mark's kids and any children I might have. It was supposed to be untouchable until they were 21. I navigated to the transaction history. My heart stopped. 6 months ago, the balance was $450,000. Today, the balance was $12.45. There were 5 transfers, all labeled management fee or reallocation, all routed to an account ending in the same 4 digits as Mark's personal LLC. He had stolen his own children's college fund. I felt sick, physically, violently sick, but beneath the nausea there was a cold, hard resolve hardening like steel. This was it. This was the smoking gun. My father valued the law above all else. He valued legacy. Stealing from a trust wasn't just a crime, it was a violation of the sacred duty of a patriarch. My phone rang again. It was my mother. "Rachel," Linda sounded frantic, her voice trembling. "Please, you have to come over. Mark is here. He says the police are going to arrest him because of a mistake his partner made. He needs us to sign a bridge loan against the house to pay for the legal bond. Andrew is calling the bank now." "Mom," I said, my voice sharp, "do not sign anything. Put down the pen." "But he's your brother. He's crying, Rachel. I've never seen him cry. He says if we don't help him by 5:00 p.m., they're coming for him." It was 2:00 p.m. He was accelerating the timeline. He was using fear, pure, unadulterated terror, to rob them. "Listen to me," I said, grabbing my keys and the stack of printed documents I had just generated, the default notices, the lawsuit David sent, and the trust fund transaction history. "I am coming over. Tell Dad to wait. Tell him I have the money." "You," Linda sounded confused. "But." "Just tell him to wait," I shouted. "Tell him I can write the check, but we need to meet first. Keep him there." I hung up. It was a lie. I wasn't going to write a check for Mark, but it was the only bait that would pause the pen. I grabbed the folder. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. It was a trial, and I was the prosecutor. I drove toward my parents' house, the Honda Civic pushing 70 in a 40 zone. The fever made the world swim, but my destination was clear. Mark had spent his whole life telling everyone I was nothing. He had spent the last 24 hours trying to destroy me to save his own skin. He had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who brewed things. I was the one who understood that if you mix the wrong volatile elements together and apply heat, you don't get a solution. You get an explosion. I pulled into the driveway. Mark's Porsche was there. My father's Lincoln was there. I took a deep breath, clutching the file folder to my chest. It was time to end this. I burst through the front door of my parents' house without knocking. The air inside was thick, suffocatingly warm, and smelled of stale coffee and high-tension anxiety. I found them in the library, not the dining room. It was a room lined with leather-bound legal texts, a sanctuary where my father, Andrew, had prepared for his biggest cases. Now, he sat hunched over his heavy oak desk, a pen hovering over a stack of documents that looked terrifyingly like a home equity line of credit application. Linda was standing by the window, wringing her hands, her face pale and drawn. And Mark was pacing the Persian rug, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. When I entered, he spun around, and for a split second, the relief on his face was palpable. He thought I was the cavalry. He thought I was the checkbook. "Thank God," Mark breathed, rushing toward me. "Did you bring it? A cashier's check is best, but a wire confirmation will work for the bond hearing." I walked past him, dodging his outstretched hand. I moved straight to the desk and placed my hand firmly over the documents my father was about to sign. "Dad," I said, my voice raspy but commanding, "put the pen down." Andrew looked up at me. His eyes were tired, confused. "Rachel, Mark says," he says it's a misunderstanding, a compliance error. He just needs a bridge loan for 48 hours. He said you agreed to help." "I am helping," I said. "I'm helping you keep your house." "She's wasting time," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "Dad, the wire cutoff is 4:00 p.m. If we don't send the funds, the plaintiffs will file an injunction. They'll freeze everything. Just sign the damn paper." "Why are there plaintiffs, Mark?" I asked, turning to face him. I stood between him and our parents, a physical barrier. "If it's a compliance error, why is there a lawsuit for fraud?" "It's standard corporate litigation," Mark lied, his eyes darting around the room. "You don't understand high finance, Rachel. People sue for leverage." "Do they sue for theft?" I asked. I opened my folder. I didn't throw the papers. I laid them out on the desk with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. "Exhibit A," I said, pointing to the first document. "The court filing from the Southern District of New York, State of New York versus Mark Andrew Miller. Charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud. This isn't a civil suit for leverage, Dad. It's a criminal indictment." Andrew's hand trembled. He reached for his reading glasses and pulled the document closer. The room went silent, save for the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. That's fabricated," Mark stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "She printed that off some conspiracy site." "Exhibit B," I continued, ignoring him. I slapped the next photo down. "The notice of default on your house in Highland Park. You aren't asking Mom and Dad for a bridge loan, Mark. You're asking them to pay your mortgage because you haven't paid it in 4 months." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mark, is this true? You said the house was in a trust." "It's a cash flow issue," Mark screamed, stepping toward me. "I have the assets, they're just illiquid." "And finally," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "Exhibit C." I placed the transaction log from the family trust on top of the pile. "Grandma's Education Trust," I said, looking at my father. "The one you set up. The one you made Mark the trustee of because you said he understood money better than I did." Andrew looked at the paper. He stared at it for a long time. His face, usually flushed with color, turned a terrifying shade of gray. He traced the line items with a shaking finger. "Transfer out $150,000. Transfer out $100,000. Balance $12.45. "Andrew," Linda whispered, "what is it?" Andrew stood up slowly. He looked at his son. It wasn't anger in his eyes, it was something far worse. It was the complete and total death of respect. "You stole from your own children," Andrew said. His voice was a low rumble. "You emptied the trust." "I borrowed it," Mark shrieked, backing away until he hit the bookshelves. "I was going to put it back. I just needed to cover the margin call on the Alpha Fund. If I didn't, I would have lost the firm." "You lost the firm anyway," I said coldly, "and now you want to lose their house too." "You did this," Mark lunged at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "You jealous, petty little, you went digging. You couldn't stand that I was successful. You wanted to ruin me." He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. Tell them you're lying." "Get your hands off her." The roar came from my father. Andrew Miller, 78 years old and recovering from hip surgery, moved faster than I had ever seen him. He slammed his hand onto the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Sit down, Mark," Andrew commanded. It was his courtroom voice, the voice that had put criminals behind bars for 40 years. Mark let go of me, stumbling back. He looked at his father, then at his mother. Linda was crying silently, leaning against the window frame, unable to even look at him. "You are a fraud," Andrew said, the words cutting through the air. "I have spent my life building a reputation of integrity, and you are a common thief." "Dad, please," Mark wept, collapsing onto the leather sofa. "I can fix it. I just need the money. If I settle with the partners, the criminal charges go away. I can start over. Please, don't let me go to prison." Andrew looked at the unsigned loan papers. Then he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me not with disappointment, but with a desperate, pleading realization. He realized that the daughter he had mocked was the only thing standing between him and ruin. "Rachel," he said softly, is there any way to fix this, without the house?" "No," I said firmly. "His debts are in the millions, Dad. The house wouldn't even cover the interest. If you sign that, you will be homeless in 6 months, and he will still go to prison." Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "You have money. You said you had the money. You said you had a deal." "I do," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app again, the screen still showing the deposit. I turned it around and held it up for them to see. $3,250,000, I read aloud. From the sale of Botanica to LVMH Luxury Ventures. Mark's jaw dropped. Linda stopped crying and stared. Andrew took off his glasses, blinking. You sold the soap business," Linda whispered. "It wasn't a soap business, Mom," I said, feeling a wave of exhaustion and vindication wash over me. "It was a brand I built while you were all praising Mark for spending money he didn't have." I looked at Mark. "I have the money. I could write a check right now and make your bail. I could hire the best defense team in Chicago." Mark sat up, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. "Rachel, please, we're family. I'm sorry, I was stressed. I didn't mean what I said. Please." "No," I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. "You wanted a cut," I said. "You wanted to manage me. You wanted to strip me for parts. You don't want a sister, Mark. You want an accomplice." I turned to my father. "I blocked the transaction on the trust account, Dad. I flagged it for fraud this morning. The bank is freezing Mark's access as we speak. If you want to save what's left of your dignity, you'll ask him to leave." Andrew looked at his son, the golden child, the broken man. He took a deep breath, his posture straightening. "Get out," Andrew said. "Dad." "Get out of my house," Andrew roared, pointing at the door. "And do not come back until you have answered to the law." Mark looked at us, a wall of unified judgment. He made a noise in his throat, a pathetic sound of frustration, and stormed out of the room. We heard the front door slam, then the roar of his Porsche engine one last time. The silence that followed was deafening. The aftermath was not a movie ending. There was no champagne toast. There was only the quiet, shattering sound of an illusion breaking apart. Linda collapsed onto the sofa where Mark had been sitting, weeping openly. "My boy," she kept saying, "my poor boy." Andrew slumped into his office chair, looking 20 years older than he had that morning. He stared at the trust fund documents, his finger tracing the lines over and over, as if trying to find a mistake in the math. I went to the kitchen and made tea. It was the only thing I knew to do. The fever was burning through me again, my adrenaline fading, leaving me shaking and weak. When I brought the tray back into the library, Andrew was on the phone. "Yes," he was saying, his voice devoid of emotion. "I am reporting a breach of fiduciary duty regarding the Miller Family Trust. The trustee is Mark Miller. Yes, I understand. I will cooperate fully with the investigation." He hung up the phone and looked at me. "I called the district attorney," he said. "I know," I replied, setting the tea down. "He's my son," Andrew said, his voice cracking. "But he is a criminal." He looked at me then, really looked at me. He looked at my faded sweater, my tired eyes, the defiant set of my jaw. "Rachel," he said, $3 million. "Yes," I said, sipping my tea, "plus royalties." Andrew let out a long, ragged sigh. "We told you to quit. For 10 years, we told you to quit." "You did," I agreed. "We were wrong," Linda whispered from the sofa. She sat up, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "We were so wrong, we thought we were protecting you, we thought you were lost." "I wasn't lost," I said. "I was just working." "I am so sorry," Andrew said. It was the first time in my 52 years that I had heard my father apologize. "I am sorry I didn't see you. I am sorry I valued his flash over your substance." I wanted to accept it. I wanted to hug them and say it was okay. But the scars were deep. They had sat at that dining table 24 hours ago and tried to strip me of my rights. That doesn't go away with one apology. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said quietly. "But I'm not going to manage your estate. I'm not going to replace Mark as the fixer. I'm going to travel. I'm going to buy a house in Tuscany. I'm going to enjoy my life." "You deserve it," Linda said softly. The next 6 months were a blur of legal proceedings. Mark was indicted on 12 counts of fraud. Without the bail money or the settlement cash, he was forced to use a public defender. The friends he had in high places evaporated the moment the handcuffs went on. Brenda filed for divorce 3 weeks after the arrest. She sold her story to a tabloid for a 5-figure sum, painting herself as the victim of a monster, conveniently forgetting the years she spent spending the stolen money. Andrew and Linda were devastated, but they survived. They had to sell the big house. The memories were too tainted, and they needed to replenish the trust fund for the grandkids, but they moved into a nice condo downtown. I didn't pay for it. They paid for it. But I did hire a forensic accountant to help them disentangle their finances from Mark's mess. That was my gift to them. As for me, I'm writing this from the terrace of a villa just outside of Florence. The air smells of rosemary and sun-baked earth. My flu is long gone, replaced by a tan and a sense of peace I never thought possible. I received an email from Mark yesterday. It was sent from the prison email system. He's serving 5 years. He asked for money for the commissary. He said the food is terrible. I didn't reply. I put down my tablet and looked out over the olive groves. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. The first quarterly royalty payment from the acquisition had just hit. $125,000. I smiled, took a sip of my wine, and blocked the email address. They told me I would never make it. They told me I was playing with a hobby. But in the end, the hobby saved them from homelessness, and it gave me the one thing they could never buy: freedom.